broadly in the Democratic Party, I would 100% agree with James Carville that, look, we need to be inclusive. We need to understand the history of the United States and factor that into modern day decision making. But what the reality is that it's not palatable for voters. They just don't like hearing about it.
Welcome back to The Unknowns. I'm your host, Charlie Stone, and today we have an interesting guest who's widely known. He gets yelled at a lot, so we're going to discuss that and so much more. Our guest today is Harry Sisson, who's a political commentator, a Democratic strategist, and has about 1.5 million followers on TikTok. And just so you know, Harry, I think I have 3 followers on TikTok. So I don't think I'll ever get there. So thank you very much for joining us. So tell me, how did you get started in this? What was the genesis?
In April, it'll be 5 years that I've been on TikTok. And I started when I was 17. I was a junior in high school. I was working in local politics at the time, and I had a upcoming TEDx speech at my school that I was going to give in like an auditorium and whatnot. And it was on the political aspects of climate change. And unfortunately, the COVID pandemic struck. So all of my local politics internships got shut down. My TEDx event got shut down. I was kind of like sitting in my basement like everybody else. And I felt like I wasn't doing enough for the upcoming 2020 election. And I was just kind of scrolling on my phone, and I saw other young people talking about politics on TikTok and social media generally. And genuinely, my thought was, oh, I feel like I could do this too. And so I turned on my phone one day, started making videos, and it started with like, a video every once in a while, then a video every day. And now, 5 almost years later, we're here.
Well, let's talk about TikTok a little bit, because your platform is under threat. So how do you sort of play and game that out? I mean, you've built that following. Obviously, you want to keep that following. But what are your concerns, and how do you think this will end up?
I think it's still somewhat too early to tell. Donald Trump, for all my disagreements with Donald Trump, said that he's against a TikTok ban. So I think it remains to be seen if he wants to enforce it, if he has the ability to not enforce it. I think there's still a lot of legal questions up in the air. But, if it does get banned, I will still be active on social media along with my peers. We'll just move to other platforms, YouTube, Instagram. I'm still on Twitter, of course, and go from there.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, they've always said that politics makes strange bedfellows. Here you are, who's been a strong advocate. You obviously met with the president and Barack Obama and Vice President Harris and campaigned for them. But there's one thing you agree with Donald Trump. We're making news today. Is that right?
There you go. Maybe a possible middle ground there. Yeah, look, I've long said that I've disagreed with President Biden when it comes to a TikTok ban, not because I don't think he's doing it in good faith, but I just personally, as an American citizen, have not seen enough evidence to think that the ban should go into place. And I'm not sure about the legal arguments in favor of the ban. It just kind of expands the executive power quite a bit. But yeah, if Trump does it, then great. I have no problem giving him his props.
All right. On TikTok, I assume.
On TikTok.
You'll do a video.
TikTok.
Okay. Let's look into a little bit about the election, whether you like it or not, Harry. You are one of the voices of the Democratic Party moving forward. Where did they miss?
Hindsight is 2020. So I actually think that the messaging on the Democratic side was harder to do than it was on the Republican side, because the Republicans ran on like a couple main issues, and that's all they talked about. They talked about immigration, inflation, grocery prices, gas prices. And it didn't really matter for a lot of voters what Donald Trump was actually going to do about this stuff. He never actually provided a solution as to how he's going to lower grocery prices.
Do you think, as you move forward, what advice will you give future presidential candidates?
Please embrace like every medium. Don't leave out TikTok. Don't leave, if TikTok remains, don't leave out YouTube. Don't leave out podcasts. Don't ignore any of that stuff. It's real. The impact is real. And often these platforms are getting more streams and more listens or more viewership just generally than any of these mainstream media outlets that they traditionally do interviews with. So please don't ignore that stuff. And when it comes to the issues, just throughout this entire election cycle, something that really stuck in my mind was just Bill Clinton in the 1990s. It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy, stupid, as him and James Carville would say. And I think that we can learn a lesson from that. We can still learn a lesson from that. And then going forward in 2028, speak to the issues that matter most to the American people. And of course, I think the economy is still going to be there.
Yeah, James was on our show, and I asked him, and he was clear in his response that as far as the platform and the issues, is like, cut the identity politics crap. His words, not mine, right? His sense that people don't want to hear that. It's great, but it's not going to win you elections. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that with Kamala Harris, I don't really think she leaned into identity politics at all. She never really made it about her being a woman or her being a person of color or anything like that. And she kind of didn't really talk about issues that are traditionally seen as identity politics all that often. So I don't think that was a failure of her campaign, but broadly in the Democratic Party, I would 100% agree with James Carville that, look, we need to be inclusive. We need to understand the history of the United States and factor that into modern day decision making. But what the reality is that it's not palatable for voters. They just don't like hearing about it. And it's very easy to make a counter argument to that from the Republican side. We can't just be thinking about the argument we make. We have to be thinking about the argument they make as well in response to what we're advocating for. So generally, reflecting on this election and past elections, I think, we are still the better party on this, but we have to be a little bit more precise with our messaging, I think.
So focus on the economy, focus on things that people, right, raising families and having their jobs, and put aside sort of the more narrow discussion around identity. Yes.
I think we saw the main issues for people in this election. It was like the economy and immigration. That should have been everything for us. Yeah.
What is your plan moving forward?
Yeah, so I'm still in school. I'm a senior at NYU. I actually took off the fall semester to focus on the election and politics and to kind of just give my undivided attention to that. I've also, of course, thought about going to law school, thought about running for politics at some point. I think it's kind of still up in the air, a little bit.
So you got to have some pretty thick skin because, when I've seen you on TikTok in my feed, it's usually you start and then some older dude mostly starts yelling at you, and I've seen some of it. I mean, some of it's fair, right? But resilience is important in politics and in life, but how do you deal with that?
It just doesn't bother me, and it never really has. I think when I was 17 and I just started out and I was just kind of seeing some people in my comments and seeing people that disagree with me saying I want you to die, for example, right? That at 17 was a little chilling. But now that I'm 22, I've been doing this for a long time, and I just don't care. And I always say that, if I have these older men who are Trump supporters, responding to me on TikTok, and that's what they dedicate their time to, then I think they need to find a better hobby. I think they need to go explore the world a little bit more if I'm taking up a lot of their time. So
you said you were 17 when you started this. Now you're the very old man at 22. Do you think your policies or your views on politics are going to change? Are you allowing yourself grace as you get older, that some of the things you believe in today may not be what you believe in tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that, I started getting involved in politics or just kind of researching it when I was around 16. And I'd say that the morals and values I established then remain today. A lot of those, issues, those being reproductive rights, my view hasn't changed on reproductive rights. It's not going to change anytime soon. When it comes to healthcare, I think we should expand healthcare access. That's not going to change anytime soon. But what I will say is that when I was 17, I was a big Bernie supporter, I read his book. I was like, this is the guy. And then Biden became the nominee. And I was initially disappointed. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of my TikTok page, I was, man, I'm sad that Bernie dropped out, but we got to unite behind Biden. And then I researched more about the president and learned more about him, his story, his policies, and looked at how, policies similar to his have worked over time. And that moved me a lot closer to Biden and I'd say the center. So, I've evolved, I think, a lot from when I was younger, and I anticipate more evolution. Do I think I'll ever be a Republican? No, but I don't see myself kind of being an extreme on anything. I think I'm big on pragmatism.
Are there any Republicans that you look at and say, you know what, they seem to have their act together. I appreciate their viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people like Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney are opponents to Donald Trump, of course, but I think that they're very principled. And, while we disagree, I think that they want what's best for the country. I think folks like Mitt Romney and the late John McCain, I appreciate Lisa Murkowski, who I've disagreed with a lot, but I also think she cares a lot about the country. But I also think that's somewhat of a dying breed in the Republican Party. People like Mitt Romney are no longer considered the pinnacle of what Republicans should be. They're now considered evil, or they're being pushed out. And people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are very extreme, I think any objective person would argue, is being pushed more to the helm of the Republican Party. So